and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to introduce to you now. Amber Campion is a trauma-informed yoga teacher and mindfulness-based life and leadership coach. She is also the founder of the Dynamic Release Flow Method and the Fulfillment Formula. For more than a decade, Amber's work in the field of emotional intelligence, personal development, and self-discovery has led her to create embodied trainings, workshops, retreats, masterminds, and online courses, supporting anyone to bring their full self into the world. Amber is an experienced registered yoga teacher, along with hundreds of additional hours training focused on somatic therapy. She has received in-depth coaching training, trained in Reiki, neurolinguistics programming, and continues to bring depth to her work through training in martial arts, improv, shadow work, breath work, energy work, and somatic therapy. Amber has been featured all over the world, including in Positively Positive, Thrive Global, Thought Catalog, YourTango, and the Yogipreneur. Amber, what an honor to welcome you to Boundless Body Radio.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Casey.
It's a total honor to have you on. My first question for you is is that it? That's all you do? That's it?
Yeah, it's funny hearing my bio read, and I'm 42, but I started this journey when I was in my early 20s. So I've been in this wellness, we'll just call the umbrella of wellness industry for 16 years. So, it gives you it's a lot of time to learn.
Suppose you've done a thing or two. I mean, cutting that down to get it to be as small as it was a real challenge. There's so many other things on there that we could have also talked about in your intro. You are a busy person.
I'm a curious person. That's what I say. I'm very curious.
I love that. Is that something that's always been part of your character?
Being curious? Oh, yeah, for sure.
Well, I would love to hear your personal story. I think it's really interesting. Can you tell us what it was like growing up?
Yeah. Oh, gosh, growing up, you went right there. Okay. Well, I guess one of something that to note, I don't always share this, but when I was little, I had a neurological brain disorder. I was diagnosed with epilepsy as a child. So I had my first grand mal seizure, which is there's many different types of seizures. And most of my childhood, I was having petite mal seizures, which are these really mild seizures. You might not even notice someone's having a petite mal seizure. It really looks often like someone's just spacey. And you can imagine when you're little, under 5, and I don't have language to explain what's going on. I also don't really know that everyone else isn't having the same exact experience. How could I? I'm 3, I'm 4. I don't know. I'm just starting to learn. So my parents thought I was just spacey, really. That's it. A little bit, maybe some learning disabilities. They didn't know, right? But of course they're not like, oh, she must have epilepsy. No parent's going to go right there, right?
Wow. And
then I think I was probably about 5 years old when I had my first grand mal seizure. Now those, well, of course I have no memory of it. From what I heard, are pretty, pretty obvious. Apparently what happened to me is I turned completely gray and then got blue polka dots all over.
Wow.
Like my mom said, it was and then you throw up and you pass out and you shake.
Wow.
So that's pretty obvious, right? Yeah.
That's crazy. Wow.
It's crazy, right?
How long did you have to deal with those?
Well, gosh. Okay. So, it's interesting, but I don't always talk about it, not because of anything I don't want people to know about this, but so you're put on medication, especially when you're a young child like this, because you can only have so many of those seizures before you have permanent brain damage. And so you're put on medication. There's no cure for epilepsy. It's not like, here, take this and it'll go away. But you can take things to suppress the amount of seizures. And actually now, this was so long ago, but now there are diets and all sorts of more healthy routes to try to suppress the amount of seizures you have. And so I was on that, the suppressants, the medical suppressants, and you have to go to the doctors too, once a month. I actually have really good memories of this. My mother, she was so good about this. She would take me to the hospital, and my mom said I would skip to the nurse's office where I had to get my blood drawn. So I had to get my blood drawn once a month. they also would do these brain scans, and on children, it's like they just like sticky glue that they stick in your hair. And I thought it was so cool to like pick the dried glue out of my hair. Wow. Like, right. And then the nurse would draw a smiley face on my bandage. And then my mom would take me to the hospital store and buy me a gift. And it was, I actually remember one of the gifts. It was so silly. It was a magnet, and it was the shape like a flower, but the center of the flower was a chef's face with a chef's hat. And I thought it was the coolest thing. You know, I'm like 6, 7 years old when all of this is happening. And my parents are trying to figure out how do we normalize this for her, wow. You know, and maybe even make it. So I actually have fun memories, but to answer your question, how long did I have to deal with this? My family was not particularly religious. My father grew up Mormon. And so I think like a lot of parents, maybe when they have kids, how do we integrate spirituality into their life? And so often I'm sure parents just choose like, well, I was taught this, so maybe I'll teach this. So we did go to a Mormon church, which I got kicked out of when I was 12. That's another story. But when I was probably like 9, 10, still very little, I don't have the ages exactly, but still little. My parents, I think like any parent, when your kid is sick, you're like, I will do anything. I will do anything. And so the church had recommended getting me blessed, and maybe that would help. And so they did. The whole church came together. I remember there was hundreds of people there. I remember going up to the front of the church, and these men circled me, so I couldn't see anyone anymore. I was just like this little person sitting in a chair in the circle, and they all put their hands on my head, and the whole church started praying. I'm pausing because I know some people are going to hear this and think it sounds weird, but this is what happened. And then I saw a white light, and all I knew in that moment was I didn't have it anymore. But again, I'm so little, you know, you don't like, when you're this little, you're not like, oh, you're just like, oh, that happened, you know?
Yeah, right.
But anyways, years later, you know, you can't drive if you have epilepsy. And so when I was 15, I wanted to get my driver's permit, and my mom was like, you know, you can't do that. And I was like, Mom, just trust me, I don't have epilepsy anymore. I just know. And she's, you know, I've always been an eccentric kind of like artistic, really open-minded person. And I'm like, Mom, just trust me. I just know I don't have it anymore. And she was really worried about me being disappointed. And she just said, you know, if we go to the doctor and we get this brain scan and you still have it, you just can't be disappointed. Like, and we got the brain scan, and they were like, she has no signs of epilepsy. She could move on. Like, I used to have to tell people, like every school I went to, every friend, like I always had to tell people I have epilepsy because in case I have a seizure, all of these things. And the doctor was like, all that, you don't have to do it anymore.
Wow. That is an amazing
story. And so it all
story.
ended.
Wow.
I know.
That's so crazy. So
yeah.
I would have been one of the dudes with my hands on your head. You were smart enough to get kicked out at 12. I stuck it out in the church until I was like in my 20s.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's just, that whole story is just, I won't get super deep into it, but I'm a big girl. I'm 6 foot tall, and I had brought a friend when I was 12. And I always tended to have like friends that were bullied and pushed around a lot. I was too, but I knew how to defend myself. And this girl was being really mean to one of my friends, turned out to be the daughter of like, gosh, I don't even remember because I haven't been a part of the Mormon church in so long. And I'm a very spiritual person, but I'm not a religious person. But we'll say whoever the head of the church is, it was his daughter. And basically the girl was picking on my friend all day long. And then she like skipped the class where all the, you know, they send the kids off to their age group and they learn. And she didn't come to class. And then I heard her outside saying something like, if I go in there, I'm going to beat her up. And I don't know what came over me, but I got out and I just opened the door and I punched her. I guess I just was like, this is going to end right now. This girl's being so mean and so ridiculous. But anyways, when we went to our fathers, I'm being like really calm and obedient, and she's like cussing, and like it was so weird to see this, especially like in church. And anyways, the church was like, we think it's better if you guys don't come back.
Wow.
So
Crazy.
yeah.
Wow.
Well, we just hopped right into storytelling. Huh?
I know, this is great. This is great. They're great stories. I'm curious. Well, first of all, I also want to make a point. It's amazing that we had all of this information in like the 1920s that a ketogenic diet could be used to help some kids with epilepsy. And by and large, that information was lost for decades. And, you know, through the work of the Charlie Foundation and things like that, they started to uncover it again. And that's, you know, again, it's something that maybe could be helpful or useful as an adjunct in certain situations and certain people. But yeah, you're right. It's interesting. We've learned so much about how diet can affect things like epilepsy in kids. Pretty crazy.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I'm curious, how did you start to develop your kind of current life mission and your calling in life?
Well, I mean, you know, you bringing up my childhood, obviously our childhood really does shape and influence our choices. And so it's really interesting that I had this history with, you know, a neurological brain disorder, and just there's some other stuff that all makes sense to me now as an adult that I ended up where I ended up. But when I was a young person, I was like most people, I don't really know exactly what I want, but I thought, you know, I'll be an artist. That's what I want to be. Like I said, I was a really creative, eccentric, expressive person. And I moved to New York City on my own when I was 20 years old in pursuit of becoming a photographer. So that's how I ended up in New York City. And again, this is like another very strange story that you can't quite explain. But my parents were both from Jersey. They met in California. And then they never really talked about New York City. It's not like they worked in New York City or visited New York City, but they said as a child, I used to always say, I'm going to live in New York City one day. And they wondered how I even knew about it.
Wow.
But I always said it as a kid, I'm going to live in New York City one day. I'm going to live in New York City one day. And as long as I can remember, I just knew I needed to be in New York City. So I ended up moving there on my own at 20. And I now know that was completely meant to be, because I went there like, I'm going to be an artist, which I still identify as an artist, and everything I create, I consider art. I just ended up in the healing arts, you know, a bit more. And I still write, and I write poetry. I'm actually working on a poetry book, but it's all around healing, you know. But New York City, when I landed there, I started to meet people that completely changed my paradigm about life. I started to really understand some of the trauma that was living in my body. And I guess the very first thing that ever happened was, you know, I worked for a photographer for a while, realized, okay, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be in that industry. It didn't really quite fit with me. I got a degree in advertising and PR, which there's a whole big story about how that happened. But I was like, okay, I'll go get a job in my degree, and did that for a year. And I met a woman who was an actress who also worked for this IT firm. I was doing PR for them. And I had here's another thing. So I had chronic, crazy stomach stuff as a kid, like not having a bowel movement for 2 weeks straight. So also at the doctors all the time, trying to figure that out. And like, I remember going to like doctors where like everyone's like senior citizens, and I'm like, you know, 12 and they're giving me like things like Metamucil. They're just, you know, it's like they have really no answer. And what's so funny now is like ultimately what changed things for me was my diet. And all those years, a Western doctor, never ever suggested that. But anyways, this actress was like, maybe you just need to get a colonic. And I didn't even know what a colonic was, but she told me, and I was like, oh, that's intense. But you know, but you know, I'll try it. And I went to this woman to get a colonic, and my intestines were so impacted that she couldn't actually do it. She said it was like water hitting a brick wall.
That's crazy.
That's so crazy. That's like how sick I was. But I didn't even know I was that sick because I had just always been that way. That was how I had been since I was a child. So I just didn't know how bad it was. And so she said, you've already paid and I've already done, the dirty work. So what I can do though is give you a holistic health session, a holistic health counseling session. So put my clothes on. She gave me the session, learned a little bit about my, emotional state of being, my patterns with eating. She was very focused on, I just need to change this girl's diet, which she was right. She taught me about things like kale and quinoa. I had never heard these words. And just told me like where to go in New York City to get this stuff. I was shopping at bodegas getting like white pasta and canned tuna fish and Butterfingers. That was like my diet.
Wow.
And I just took to it. I like right away something clicked, and I, bought everything she said. I started looking up recipes. It just really clicked for me. I didn't have resistance to it. I was like, yes. And she said it would take a couple weeks before I noticed. And she said, you might even feel worse for a couple weeks, which is exactly what happened. I felt really bloated and really tired and lethargic and crappy for a couple weeks. And then all of a sudden, and I'm just going to say it because we're already going there, Casey, but I just had this massive bowel movement. And then I had a bowel movement every day since.
Wow. How amazing was that?
And so that was amazing. And that started for me, I was probably like 22 is when I started to have bowel movements every day.
Wow.
So 22 years of my life, I didn't. And it was, so here, imagine that. Imagine 22 years of your life, like having a bowel movement, maybe like 2 or 3 times a month. That was my normal. And then going to having one every day. So my life changed. Like, it wasn't just like my skin cleared up, my weight went to like my natural body weight. The whites in my eyes, they were never white. They became white. So there was all this physical stuff that happened, but emotionally and mentally, what happened for me was mind blowing. Like, I all of a sudden had like my mood swings. They weren't, oh, that's not just me. Like, that was the fact that I was so unwell. My moods, I didn't have these extreme mood swings. I didn't go into these deep, dark holes as often. It was like, I felt like I actually had some semblance of, I'm trying not to use the word control, but at that time, that's what it felt like, some semblance of control over my emotions.
Wow.
And my creative, like, I never realized how creative I was until then. Like, I had all this energy. That's when I like started training. I trained for 7 years, capoeira, Brazilian martial art. I picked up the guitar and started playing guitar again. I was learning when I was 15, but I kind of, I never stuck with things like all this creative energy and writing poems and writing songs. And it was like this burst of energy just came out of me. And it was like, like anyone else, when you have something so magnificent like that happen, you want to like sing it from the rooftops.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Which I can become, I will say, like, at first I became a little bit like, where it's not like you think you want everyone to do it because you've had such a profound impact from this shift, but it can become like self-righteous and pushy. And so you're not really helping people at first.
Right.
So that's how I was. But I ended up so my very first education in the realm of wellness was in my early 20s. I went to the Institute for Integrative Nutrition in New York City. And that was the beginning. And for many, many years, I thought I would just be focusing on the food realm. But life kept opening up deeper and deeper. And now here I am today.
Wow.
Working much deeper than with food. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. That's so cool. What an amazing story. I don't want to miss this. It's a bit of a tangent, but I get so curious about this. It's so easy for us, or a lot easier, to look back on our life, look at all the things that quote unquote kind of went wrong that ended up going absolutely perfectly, that set us up to be where we are today. So why do I spend so much damn time worrying about what's going to happen in the present moment or in the future? Like, I can recognize like the things that failed in my life ended up being the greatest blessings in my life. And yet I still will sit today and worry about stuff. It's such a waste.
Right. And isn't that, I love the way you speak, Casey. You really like capture things, but isn't that like the human conundrum, that it's the condition, right? Like, that ability to just sit back and trust our life and become the witness of it rather than constantly resisting the flow. There really is a flow that is happening, even when it feels challenging, even when you're like, wait, this makes no sense. I mean, as I was going down the path into wellness and holistic health, I mean, I was ridden with self-doubt. There was nothing in me that it didn't seem logical to me at all. There was so much imposter syndrome and who am I to help people, even with my stories. It's like there was so much resistance. And because of that, so much suffering along and resisting and pushing against this thing that was really calling me home, calling me to my purpose and calling me to this place that really feels now, exactly where I belong. But yeah, there was so much resistance to it. And it really is such an interesting thing that, why we resist so much. Like we want to dictate everything so much. And I guess it comes back to that control. There is that need to surrender and trust a little bit and get curious about the directions we're being pulled to, even if they make no sense to us at all, right?
Mm. Wow, that's really beautifully said. I love that. I'm curious, how did you address some of those things and start to build a little bit of confidence in yourself to face that resistance, that imposter syndrome? How were you able to start to kind of change your viewpoint around that?
Well, pretty early on, and again, this is there's so much that happened for me in New York. In fact, I wasn't born or raised in New York City. My parents moved around a lot, but whenever people ask where I'm from, I say New York. One, I spent, almost 13 years there. So it's the longest place I ever lived. I lived there my entire 20s and my early 30s. But for me, I'm from there because that's really where I came alive. That's really where I stepped into who I am today. So, New York brought so much to me. And one of those things was mentors, people who just, I feel really saw me before I could see me. And were adamant about putting a mirror up and going stop it. Look, this is who you really are. And I ended up doing my yoga teacher training I think I graduated. I was probably 25 or 26 when I graduated with my first certificate. But I had gone into that teacher training only for myself, I had a lot of rage. So a lot of anger in me. I was a self-cutter starting at age 12. So for me, going into a yoga teacher training was solely just healing medicine for me. I had zero intention to ever teach yoga. And I had this mentor when I graduated who I worked at the New York Open Center in New York City, which is one of the largest urban holistic learning centers. And he just kept encouraging me. I really think you need to teach. And specifically, I think you need to volunteer with this organization that I volunteer for. It's called the Lineage Project. And what they do is they bring mindfulness to at-risk and incarcerated youth. And I was just like, well, one, no, I will not be teaching. And two, oh, no, no way. That just terrified me. But he really kept at it. And eventually I went in and I volunteered one day. And you go in and teaching teams. You never just go in alone. And, as a new person, I wasn't doing anything other than just observing. But a year later, I was still volunteering. And I became pretty active with the nonprofit, just volunteering and showing up and helping. And a year after volunteering, they actually came to me and said, we'd like to train you to be a lead teacher. And so I feel, I guess the long story short is what helped me develop that confidence. And it's an ongoing process, but was one, having people in my life that believed in me, that, encouraged me to move in a direction that I felt like, oh, no way. Who am I? How could I? There's no way. So that mentorship is really key, whether that's a friend, a teacher, a coach, a parent, a grandparent. Mentorship really seems to make a huge difference. There's a lot of scientific studies on this too, with resiliency and all sorts of stuff. Just having people that believe in you and help you see the possibility of your life in a way that you might not be able to fully see it without that support. But then I just did it. It was like, I think for me, it was when I was encouraged to go volunteer with this organization, and then they invited me to become a lead teacher. It was like, at this point now, it was like, who am I to say no? Like now, and so really it was just doing it, teaching. Like I always tell people, I now teach yoga teacher trainings. And one of the huge aspects of my teacher trainings is in the realm of confidence and public speaking and really developing your own unique voice and talking about all the self-doubt and what I refer to as our itty bitty shitty committee, that voice inside your head. Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's so funny because we call it the inner critic, as if there's like one, but anyone with self-doubt knows we have much more than one voice.
It's
like a whole
committee for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And so talking about that, I think just talking about it, like how we're doing it right now, Casey, and putting a name to it, like, self-doubt, not believing in myself, and just being able to verbalize it and talk about it in community. And then hear other people say it, and even hear people that you think like, wow, really? You have self-doubt? Like, I can't tell you how many times I've shared this story and my students have been like, what, you? And I'm like, oh my gosh, to the point that like the first year of teaching, I thought I was having full-on panic attacks, like heart rate going 1,000,000 miles an hour, sweating to the point that my shirt was soaking wet by the end of a 60-minute class, even though I wasn't doing the practice. Just nerves,
That's crazy.
But I just kept doing it until I started to really retrain my brain. Like, I can survive this. I now have survived it 10 times, 11 times, 12 times. Yeah. But I would say that mentorship and those conversations, those really vulnerable, open conversations in community, allowing yourself to be seen and heard and hearing other people and realizing people like your own mentors or people you look up to and admire, you get them in a real conversation. I guarantee you they're going to have stories of, oh man, this was really hard. And here's where self-doubt shows up for me even today, and then all of a sudden you're like, wow, why am I letting this thing rule my life so much? Everyone has it. Like, everyone has it.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I think it would be easy for somebody to go to your beautiful website or see your offerings, to see the way that you teach your classes. It's just so unique and authentic and really confident. And they would just see like, oh, she just does this naturally. And they wouldn't see all the work and, stepping up into that role that you had to do and all the people that helped you along the way. It's super interesting. Can you tell us a little bit about your current style that you teach?
Yeah. So over the years, and it was never intended. It wasn't like I sat down and was like, I'm going to create a style of yoga. It's actually years ago, because I think I mentioned already in this podcast that I trained for about 7 years in New York City, a Brazilian martial art called capoeira. And so years ago, just again, because I'm a creative person, I think creativity started to naturally blend into my teaching. Right. So it's like, this is how I can be an artist still. So there's artistry to my stuff. And so I developed something many years ago called Yogipreneur. It was actually quite popular. I made a DVD. People loved it. I did workshops around the world, and it was a vinyasa flow, a traditional vinyasa flow class. But I integrated capoeira movements and it just integrated that. And so I did that for a while. But as I got older, I was like, I don't think this is it for me. Like, this is fun. This is unique. This is creative, but this isn't it for me. Like, I don't want to just spend my life teaching yoga. It was also very physical. So it was limited. It wasn't open to a lot of people. And so I just started to kind of mellow the practice out a little bit for my own self at first. And then I started training in fascia work and learning more about the fascia and learning how to do myofascial release. And wow, especially as someone who was an athlete, who was doing martial arts all the time, just like, wow, my body was already so well kept because of the yoga. And most martial arts and athletes who don't do yoga, like all the people I did capoeira with were just like hurting all the time. And I was like, well, yoga, because I would barely get injuries or barely hurt. And so I knew the yoga was really helping, the asana. And even the meditation, all of that stuff was helping so much with my martial arts and my physical activities outside of yoga. And then when I started learning about the fascia, though, that really opened things up for me and healed me on a whole nother level. Not just physically, but there's so much mental components with that. And it slowly started to unfold over time. And then I came up with a name for it. For a while, it was just dynamic release method. But now when I teach like workshops or in studios, I call it dynamic release flow. I think because for a while, dynamic release method, people like thought it would be more therapeutic, but it's actually a vinyasa flow. It's just taught very slow, very intelligently. We move almost like you're doing a qigong practice, so softening in the joints. And really moving from your center the way I got trained in martial arts, where everything originates from the center. So you can really start to find that levity in moving from posture to posture and really accentuating the breath. Like the breath is boss in the movement, and starting to tap into that more subtle, energetic body. And then we close doing self-myofascial release with tennis balls. And it is the best.
Wow.
I love it.
That sounds amazing. Yeah. That sounds awesome. I definitely want to talk with you about fascia. First, I just have to tell you this. This is just so funny. So for the listener, like capoeira is like it's a martial art, but like you wouldn't like fight somebody like this. It's more like, it looks like a dance, a flow. It's really amazing. And, when I was still in the church, I got called to serve a 2-year mission, and I was called to serve down in Brazil. And that's where capoeira comes from. And yeah, so the funniest thing, I was walking in the street, and these 2 kids, they must have been like 10 or 11 years old. You could tell they were like getting in an altercation and started like pushing each other back and forth, and were like yelling at each other. It was getting really intense. And then they broke into capoeira poses and started like actually street fighting using capoeira. I've never seen anything like that before or after that. Crazy.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that is hilarious that you say that, because capoeiristas always joke around like the only way we would like turn this into a street fight is if we wanted to someone to think we are totally crazy. And then we'll just start jingaing, because like the main move is this move called the jinga. And then they would be like, okay, I'm not fighting you because you're nuts. I'm out of here. And that's how we could win the fight. But yeah, it's very beautiful and very acrobatic. And it is actually a fight. Back in the day, the slaves from Angola that got brought to Brazil were training that as a fight. And then the reason it looks so dancey is that was used to disguise that they were actually training in a fight. So when their owners were going by, they were like, oh, they're just doing some ritual dance. And so that they can continue that's why it's practiced in a circle. Everyone circles them. There's 2 people in the center. And then there's different styles of music. There's more of the fighting style music. And then there's more of the music where it gets really, really dancey. Wow. Yeah, there's a lot of, the history is super rich with capoeira.
That's so cool. I didn't know any of that. That's awesome.
Yeah. Like modern day now, no one's going to be like, I want to train capoeira to really learn how to street fight. I'd say you learn capoeira if you want to learn like acrobatics, and you want to learn music, and you want to learn culture and language. Like that's the place to go, man.
It was by far the most beautiful street fight I've ever seen. So
yeah, exactly.
So I am sitting next to Anatomy Trains by Thomas Myers. I'm also sitting next to Fascia in Motion and Becoming a Supple Leopard. This is stuff that we love talking about. Bethany does a form of myofascial release. It's called Rossiter. It's very much like Rolfing. Instead of using her hands, she uses her feet. And, we've got all these amazing posters in our home gym that show these lines of tissue connecting the tongue to the toes and one side of the body to the other side of the body. And people will come in with like knee pain or shoulder pain, and Bethany can look at them, go to a completely different area of the body and help that person move and create like space out of nothing. Can you tell us a little bit about fascia, what it is, and how you got so interested in it?
Sure. Well, first of all, what it is, it's a connective tissue, a fibrous connective tissue that surrounds in individual muscles plus muscle bundles. And it covers our body from head to toe, like a bodysuit. You can think like Spider-Man. The thickest part of that fascia is on the sole of the foot. That's called plantar fascia. Gosh, I mean, how I got interested in it was just years ago in New York City. Again, so much will be like, in New York City, I learned this. In New York City, this is, so it's such a profound place for me. I took a workshop. It was a well, the first thing that got me into it is I did my Thai massage training in Thailand. And I really was like, whoa, body work, like, this is interesting what it's doing for me physically. Yes. But where I always went with body work, especially like deep stuff that really works with the fascia, was what it was doing for me mentally and emotionally. That was really that was what blew my mind, because it was obvious, like, yes, obviously this stuff is working for the body, but whoa, and it's not just when I say what it was doing for me mentally and emotionally, I don't mean just in the moment. Like, yes, in the moment, I felt this release. I felt this ease. I felt this surrendering. But I was finding that it was also impacting me long-term, mentally and emotionally, in the positive. So I think that's really what interested me. And then I took a workshop with self-myofascial release using like therapy balls, these different size therapy balls. And I just went on a whirlwind after that and have been on it ever since. Just what is this? What is this fascia thing? And, I mean, you and your wife would know. Your wife, is it your wife, your partner?
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
You would know you just mentioned like anatomy trains. These are like great fascia resources. But even like a decade ago or so, there wasn't a whole lot of science on fascia. And there was just these really like strange kind of scientists, coming out and and talking about it, but it was still pretty new. Now we're hearing it a lot more, and there's a lot more science out. And I always suspected this, but now it is really happening, and I'm super excited to see what happens in the next 10, 20 years. But now they know that the fascia doesn't just surround muscles and muscle bundles, but it goes through the muscles. It actually goes through the muscles. And then what they know even more is it also goes through the nervous system. So you can imagine this is literally intertwined through our entire body. So you release something, like when we talk about having knots in the muscle, it's not a knot in the muscle, it's a knot in the fascia. Or, it's you can imagine like you pull a piece of thread and there's this taut area, right, in the shirt now. Well, that's what happens when we have tension in our body, and it feels like, oh, it's in the muscle, but it's actually in the fascia. And we can manually, with hands or with I use tennis balls, that I use just like basic things to teach people so that it's really accessible. Like you don't have to go buy fancy therapy balls, just tennis balls. For the feet, I use rubber balls, like kids' rubber balls, like kids used to play jacks. And use that to really start to kind of just even it out, massage it out. So when you're doing that, yes, on that like more surface level, you are impacting the body. And then if you're impacting the body and the muscles, you're impacting the joints. So there's so much science around the longevity of your body, your physical body, when you work with the fascia. But now they're doing all of this scientific research on, well, what is this doing to your mind? What is this doing to your emotions? And since it is intertwined into the muscles and into the nervous system is directly related to our fight or flight, which is therefore related to trauma. And so they're finding that there is all of this science. And of course, it'll take years before science claims it. But there are studies now coming out that are showing that, the fascia and doing work to release the fascia can help with releasing trauma that's stored in the body. And it's just mind-blowing. And from my years of working with it, absolutely, 100%, I would say me being a case study myself and the hundreds of students I've worked with, it absolutely has an impact on us mentally and emotionally as well.
Wow. That's so amazing. I'm so glad you went there. That was actually going to be one of my questions. The people that we see oftentimes work in a seated position. So the body will help you adapt to that position more and more. And so hips kind of tip forward, the feet tend to kind of splay out a little bit, the shoulders are coming down and kind of rounded, the neck is rolling forward. Well, guess what kind of position that is? That is a trauma position. So it makes perfect sense. And I don't even know, is it the trauma that causes it or vice versa? I think they all kind of like play together, don't they? And it's almost like you don't know where like the cart and the horse are, but they all act together.
Absolutely. There was a saying in my school, IIN, you eat what you are and you are what you eat. So they feed each other, right? Like yes, absolutely what you said. Like we're going to choose food based on our emotional state, right? Like if I'm really feeling really anxious and overwhelmed, unless I've really trained myself to access that more mindful state when I'm in a state of dis-ease, I might go choose just like, I just need like a quick, like I'm going to go grab a burrito, like and put it in the microwave or something, right? Yeah. Versus like, you know what, I probably need more than anything right now is a tall glass of water and a really healthy salad. And so it takes practice to actually go to that place when we're in dis-ease. I'm just giving this as an example with food and vice versa, So same thing with the body, like the body trauma is going to start to create that. And then we continue to have that pattern in our body and that continues to manifest and hold it. It's holding it.
Sure. Where the opposite is, the shoulders are kind of down and back and the chest is up and your heart is open. And like one of our guests told us to look down and try to smile. And it's really hard to do. When you look up and try to smile, it comes really naturally and easily. And it's such a different posture that's more open and available. And, you can smile at people, make eye contact. It's a totally different way to show up in the world. So cool.
Oh, yeah.
Wow. That's amazing. Amazing. I wanted to ask you about the fulfillment formula. Can you tell us about the fulfillment formula and why you decided to create that?
Yeah. Again, I feel like so much of the things I created, this was me tapping into my creative side and using that and going, hey, I may not have become a traditional artist by choice. And yet I am still an artist, right? And so how can I start to utilize that part of my being? And so for me, this was about how do I create a system that I can teach to people where they recognize that their life is their greatest masterpiece. And so this is where the fulfillment formula came from, which is so funny because I feel like it's this very like artistic, poetic thing that I teach, but then it's called the fulfillment formula. But the name came to me and it stuck and people said they liked it. But we have these 9 categories of life, these 9 essential categories of life, and each of them are attached to 9 core aspirations of life. So to give you an example, like one of the categories of life is health and fitness, right? That's a really important category of life for all of us. And it's attached to the aspiration of vitality. And so my idea with this, and there's 9 of them, is that no matter what anybody's individual goals are, no matter what anybody's individual aspirations are in that life category of health and fitness, and we're all going to have different ones, right? We have our own goals, our own aspirations within that life category. But what we're all after is one core aspiration, and that is vitality. And if we know that, what we can do is be much more aligned with the goals that we make so that we're not doing a bunch of should goals, which happens all the time where people are like, okay, well, I want to lose weight. So I'm going to get up and go to the gym at 5 a.m., 5 days a week. And then, at first they're really excited because they've made a new shift, but eventually they fall off because really that was a should goal. Because the thing is, they don't feel vital, this person. Now, some people might be listening going, no, this is great. I feel totally vital getting up and being at the gym by 5. I'm actually giving an example of a client. So, this person did not feel good getting up early in the morning, being at the gym at 5 a.m. It just was a should, like, this is what I should do if I want to lose weight. And so she wasn't feeling vitality along the journey. And what I teach is if you're not feeling something along the journey, you're not going to feel that when you get to the outcome, the end goal.
That's right.
And then if you don't feel that when you get to the end goal, the outcome, it doesn't stick it, or it doesn't feel fulfilling. You might have gotten what you wanted, but there's something that feels empty about it.
Yep.
And so what we need to do to really make art out of our life is that we need to create goals and aspirations that we feel that core aspiration along the way. So I started talking to her about it, and she was like, I don't know if I'll do this. And again, a lot of times this will be something that you're resisting, and she's like, I've always admired marathon runners. I don't know. I just think it's so cool. And she started to light up talking about this. So anyways, long story short, one thing led to another. She signed up for her first half marathon. By the end of this, she had developed new friends. She had, this regimen that didn't even feel like a regimen, you know what I mean? Where she would get up and do the stuff. By the end, she didn't even remember that she originally started that to lose weight. She had lost the weight, but she had forgotten that's what she wanted to do, because she was so fulfilled. She was meeting new people. She was having fun moving her body. She was fulfilled, right? And so in that area. And so that's where that's the system.
Wow. I love it. I love it. That's great. You could go to that same marathon and have somebody do it for the wrong reasons. And, it feels amazing when you do it. But the next day, when nobody cares about your Instagram pictures or whatever, if you're not in the right mindset, you're going to be really let down. Like you said, it's going to feel really empty. I think a big part of that is something really important that you talk about. And it's the reason why I stayed in a corporate job feeling like totally stuck for years and years without thinking about what I really wanted to be purposeful in my life, and starting this business as an example. Why is it easier for us to do hard work versus doing deep work? What are the differences between the two, and why would we rather do stupid stuff working hard when we're not working deep?
Oh yeah. Well, it's funny that you say that, because right away what popped in my mind is either choice is, just using this word hard, I guess, is which obviously you're familiar with this philosophy that I teach now, which is hard work versus deep work. But whether we choose what we actually want to do, but scares us or feels like it's off base, doesn't make sense, there's going to be, and I'm saying this in quotations, there's going to be hard work doing that, of course. And a lot of people avoid it because I don't know where to begin. This is so crazy. But if you continue to do what's familiar and the same, but it's literally eating at your soul, isn't that hard too? Right. And so it's what kind of hard work do you actually, and again, just using this word, I'll explain the hard work, deep work philosophy. But to me, I think that's what really got to me is either situation is going to have, who talks about this super well is, Eat, Pray, Love. Oh my gosh, I can't believe her name is slipping my mind. Elizabeth Gilbert.
That's right.
She's talked about this before. Yeah. And maybe she doesn't talk about it in this book. And it also might be another author who actually talked about this, but where I heard it was from her. And she's like, in any career that you choose, there's always going to be a shit sandwich that you have to eat. So your job could be a rock star. Casey, you could be a rock star, and there's still going to be shitty aspects about that, know?
Totally.
Having to maybe stay out late at night to do your concerts, having these, there's always something. And so she said, but what we have to do is decide which shit sandwich we're willing to eat. Because no matter what you choose, I love it too, right? It's okay, there isn't this perfect unicorn life. And if we can first accept that, then I think the choices we make moving forward become a lot more genuine. I was just going to say the hard work, deep work came from just me recognizing the typical ways in which we're taught what is success. And, success is this, you want to measure it by extrinsic factors, accolades, the amount of money you make, things like that. And then also the other thing that I noticed is, if you really want success, here's a saying we've all heard, all you need to do is work hard, right? You hear that all you need to do is work hard and then you'll be successful.
Mm.
And then then that teaches you that, like, if someone's not successful, then clearly they don't work hard, you know?
Right.
And if someone doesn't have my idea of what I think extrinsically they should have, accolades wise, money wise, then they must not be successful. So success is completely been taught to us, at least in the Western culture, 100% measured by other people's ideas, you know?
Right.
And we don't really have this model of like what success is to us. And so again, I really had just created this for myself because being a solopreneur and putting my work out into the world was really, really hard. And I noticed myself comparing myself to others. I noticed myself checking in, with others, like constantly going outside of myself to define within myself whether or not I was doing good, you know?
Yeah.
And so I just had created this kind of like balance sheet for me. And now I, share it with people, which I'm happy to share it with everyone who's listening to. I actually have like a PDF that I created that goes through this entire philosophy and breaks it up. But to give an example is like, well, I already shared one. So hard work is someone who's driven by extrinsic gains and is constantly asking of life, what do I need to do to create that life? They're very much in what do I need to do because they're driven by extrinsic gains. But when you're coming from deep work, just kind of a change, a reframe is all I'm doing. I'm just reframing. If you're coming from deep work, then you're driven by intrinsic gains. And so you're more so asking, who do I need to be to create that life?
Mm.
And so it's a different kind of, and it doesn't mean you're sitting back, but it's like, rather than what do I need to do, what kind of person creates that life?
Mm.
And then you're diving into more character qualities and building your character. And it's just a different energy. So that's an example of one. Another one is like hard work thinks, if I slow down, I'm going to fall behind. While deep work thinks I'm going to slow down to speed up.
Mm.
Yeah. And so there's this whole kind of layout that I have that just gives you a reframe. And what I have found it does for me and the people I've shared it with is, especially when we're in creation mode, whatever that is, whether that is starting a new business, writing a book, or even like, making changes with the way you run your family. You're in creation mode. You're creating your life and you're really in it. And you're starting to catch yourself judging yourself. You're starting to doubt yourself. You're getting into that contracted place and you're starting to make decisions that are making you feel even more contracted. And then there's more self-doubt and more judgments. All you have to do is read this list and you'll be able to go, oh, I'm over here doing this, and hard work. Let me reframe it and switch to deep work. You're still working, but now you're working from deep work rather than hard work. And it just changes. Like there's a lightness you'll feel in your shoulders and your chest. And it's like all of a sudden, to me, the way I describe it is like, I feel like I come back into my body. I come home to myself. I'm like, oh, there you are. Hi, Amber. I missed you. All right, let's get to work, but from a different stance.
Yeah. Wow. I love that. That's so well explained. What an amazing resource that can really help a lot of people. It's interesting to hear your story and hear all the people who encouraged you along the way, ended up being your mentors. They really believed in you. How do you feel like you bring that to the people that you're working with today?
Oh, well, I mean, I love to write. So a big part of, I think, and I hope to write many books one day. I'm working on a poetry book right now. Again, this is like that idea of success. I'm 42 and, oh, you haven't even written your first book. And then I think, some of the authors I admire the most didn't write their book until their late 40s, their first book.
Yeah.
And many of those authors, and one of them is Dwayne Wire. I think he was in his late 40s or he was in his mid 40s. He was somewhere in his 40s when he wrote his first book, and he became a prolific writer starting in his late to mid 40s. So it's like we really do need to reframe what success is. And I will write many books. And also I realized, I didn't start writing books at 20 because it's just the way I work. It's like I'm gathering, I'm gathering all this wisdom. And then that first book that comes out is really going to feel like me versus like, I just need to get a book out before I'm 30, or I just need to get a book out before I'm 40, which the world tells us we need to do, which will make you really extraordinary and really successful. Writing is a way in which, and I have a newsletter and a blog, and people are always writing me saying like, wow, you really explain that really well, which is so wild to me, Casey, because especially with having epilepsy as a young person and feeling like I didn't quite understand what was going on in the world, or people didn't understand me, one of my self-doubts, and it still pops up, is that people don't understand me. So it's so interesting to have people come and say, you're so eloquent. You really explained something that was really challenging for me in a way that it landed. I really got it. And then I offer, I teach yoga locally in my community. I offer a yoga teacher training, a 200-hour yoga teacher training, which is super in-depth. It's not just a yoga teacher training, but it's also a mindfulness-based leadership program. I have online programs. So there's so many ways I work with people. And I love it. Yeah. Teaching, writing.
Yeah, it's tremendous. I mean, this is why you are the perfect guest to be on the show, is your journey and realizing how to blend the artistic with the physical and the mental and the spiritual, and putting it all together in a way that's really authentic to yourself is really beautiful. And I've read some of your writing, and it's fantastic. And even something as simple as an Instagram post. I read this morning a post you made that talked about whispers of the unimaginable horizon. And I thought that was so beautifully captured. If you don't mind, can you tell us the wisdom that you learned from that phrase, hearing that recently?
Oh gosh, yeah. I literally just posted that today, huh?
Yeah, it was just a few hours ago.
Yeah. Okay, so let me just go to that. And I mean, go to that like in my mind. So I was doing research. So I have this membership called Ritual, and we meet 2 times a month virtually. And it's actually, we meet 2 times a month to do embodied work. So we'll meet around the new or full moon. We meet like around or on the new moon, and we meet around or on the full moon. And so we have a full moon ceremony coming up, and we do breath work. We always do journaling. Like I give writing prompts, which is embodiment work. So actually writing and journaling is really profound embodiment work. So we do that, and then we will do some breath work or dynamic release flow. And I was doing research on the full moon, and this woman, this astrologer, was talking about that. And she actually said those words, whispers from the unimaginable horizon, which I was just like, wow, those words are so beautiful. But what she was saying about that is the unimaginable horizon, and especially like you hear that, and I think the body and the mind go right away to the seductiveness of challenge and fear and worry and worst case scenarios. But what she was actually saying is the whispers are, we have to slow down, calm down, still ourselves enough to actually hear the whispers from the unimaginable horizon, which is actually all the things that are beautiful that are coming into our life in the future that we don't know yet. All the people, the relationships, the projects, the experiences. It's unimaginable because the mind just doesn't go there, right? We have the negativity bias when we think about the future. It's like, oh, worry, but there's all of these beautiful, beautiful things that are coming into each and every one of our lives in the near future. And but for us to be with that in the present moment, we have to slow down enough, calm down enough to actually hear the whispers. It's like, I imagine it like, because she says the horizon, like a soft wind blowing through your hair. And it's like, almost like a kiss from a future partner or something, or a future child, or a book you'll write, in the future. It's actually making me tear up a little bit. It's like, oh, it's this really peaceful feeling.
That's amazing. So well captured. I'm so glad she said those words, and I'm glad that you passed that message along. It's so cool. We have talked about so many different things. If you had to leave the listener with one simple tip from this conversation, what would you want them to take with them on their journey to help them out?
Well, I think a way to capture all of the depth that we went into is Something I say in every single yoga class I ever teach, and I've been saying it for probably 16 years, is notice what you're noticing and feel what you're feeling. If there's only one thing you take away from my class, it's that.
That's
and
amazing.
so I guess that, just notice, like, I think we spend so much time not noticing what we're noticing, not feeling what we're feeling. And so we become disembodied. And when we're in that disembodied place, what we are is we're actually in our body. We are still in our body, but from our neck up, we're in our heads, and we're worrying, and we're going into this kind of worst case scenario. And again, it's not to avoid noticing what you're noticing and feeling what you're feeling is sometimes very challenging. And so it's actually an invitation even into that, like not running away from that, but also sometimes what you're noticing and sometimes what you're feeling is beautiful, right? Sometimes it's beautiful and sometimes it's brutal. And we are most human when we can be with whatever is right in front of us.
Wow.
And yeah.
I absolutely love that. That's a great way to say that, an amazing way to end this conversation. You have so many things to offer people. Where can they go to find your work and connect with you?
Yeah. Well, ambercampion.com is my website. And so all my world is there. They also have, which I'll give you for the show notes, the exact links to, for instance, that Deep Work versus Hard Work documentary, or not documentary. I wish it was a documentary.
One day.
Yeah. But on my regular website, ambercampion.com, if they scroll through, there's so many beautiful little gifts that I have there. Of course, they would join my email list, but I always tell people they'll probably enjoy it because I don't just like send out ads or something. I'm actually writing, but they could always get the gift and then unsubscribe if they didn't like it. I have an embodiment practice, keep the channel open. I have an inner self-mastery. It's a success guide for those who think differently. Actually, that's what your listeners will get. And then socially, I spend most of my time on Instagram. So they can also find me at Amber Campion on Instagram. And I also have a YouTube channel that there's quite a bit of stuff up there. I'm not so regular with it, but I'm working on it.
That is amazing. Yeah. We will link to all of that in the show notes. Amber Campion, founder of Dynamic Release Flow and the Fulfillment Formula. Thank you so very much for giving us the honor of getting to chat with you, getting to learn all about physical, mental things in our lives that we can take ownership of and improve and do work on. And we're just so grateful for all of it, and so grateful for you that you'd come on our show today. So thank you very much. It's been an absolute honor.
Thank you, Casey.
Absolutely. And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.